Hello everybody, it's Jamie from Old Shipping Lines, and welcome back to a new video. Today, we're delving into the story of a shipwreck many of us know well, the magnificent ocean liner, the RMS Empress of Britain. In her time, the Empress of Britain was the largest, fastest, and most luxurious vessel sailing between the United Kingdom and Canada. She was the pride of the Canadian Pacific Fleet. However, her story took a tragic turn during World War II. On October 28, 1940, she was struck by a torpedo from U-32, sending her to the depths of the ocean. She became the largest liner lost during the Second World War and the biggest ship sunk by a U-boat. In today's video, we'll take you through her full story, from her construction and glorious career to her heartbreaking sinking beneath the waves. The vessel was commissioned by the Canadian Pacific Railway and constructed by the renowned shipbuilders John Brown and Company in Clydebank, Scotland. Now, if we quickly discuss the specifics of this vessel, she had an impressive gross tonnage of 42,348 gross registered tons, with a length of 760 feet and a beam of 97.8 feet. The ship was equipped with 9 water tube boilers, providing a total heating surface of 106,393 square feet. 8 of these were Yarrow boilers, while one was an experimental Johnson boiler, making her the first vessel to feature this design. The boilers supplied steam at 425 pounds per square inch to 12 steam turbines, which powered her 4 propeller shafts through single reduction gearing, enabling a top speed of 25 knots. The ship could accommodate 1,195 passengers, 465 in first class, 260 in tourist class, and 470 in third class. The interiors featured an eclectic blend of styles, lavishly furnished and paneled with rich hardwoods sourced from across Canada. The spaces were adorned with commissioned paintings and sculptures from the country's finest artisans, while many areas showcased a sleek, modern Art Deco design. Other sections embraced a more traditional, almost Edwardian aesthetic. This mix reflected Canadian Pacific's strategy to appeal to the more conservative tastes of Midwestern passengers. To serve as a beacon during nighttime emergencies, her 3 funnels were brightly illuminated with powerful floodlights, making them visible from 50 miles away by aircraft and from 30 miles away by nearby ships. She was launched on June 11, 1930 by the Prince of Wales. This event marked the first time that a British launching ceremony was broadcast via radio to audiences in Canada and the United States. The ship began her sea trials on April 11, 1931, reaching a speed of 25.5 knots. Since she was designed to sail a more northerly transatlantic route, where ice was occasionally present in the waters off Newfoundland. The Empress of Britain was built with outer steel plating twice the usual thickness at the stem and extending 150 feet on either side up to the waterline. Her sea trials demonstrated that she was the world's most economical steamship in terms of fuel consumption per horsepower hour for her time. After her sea trials, the ship sailed to Southampton to prepare for her maiden voyage to Quebec City. Canadian Pacific's promotional posters hailed her as the 5-day Atlantic giantess, Canada's challenger, and the world's wonder ship. The night before her departure, the Prince of Wales visited Southampton to wish her well. His inspection caused a slight delay, but at 1:12 p.m. on Wednesday, May 27, 1931, the Empress of Britain set sail for Quebec. Once at sea, The Globe, a Toronto newspaper, published an editorial celebrating the ship's significance to Canadians. It would say the following:
Canadian enterprise has issued a new challenge in the world of shipping by the completion and sailing of the Empress of Britain from England for Quebec. This giant Canadian Pacific liner of 42,500 tons sets a new standard for the Canadian route. Its luxurious equipment includes one entire deck for sport and recreation, another for public rooms, including a ballroom with decorations by world-famous artists. There are apartments instead of cabins, and each is equipped with a radio receiving set for the entertainment of passengers. In the later years of the last century, there was long agitation for a fast Atlantic service. Time has brought the answer. Despite the current depression, Canada has a new ship which will reach far for traffic during the Sunt, Lawrence season, and when winter comes will go on world cruises, carrying passengers who will ask and receive almost the last word in comfort and luxury in ocean travel. The first journey of the new Empress is a historic event in the record of Canadian advancement.
In 1931, the Empress of Britain completed 9 round voyages between Southampton and Quebec, carrying 4,891 passengers westbound and 4,696 eastbound. To kick off her winter cruise, she made a westbound transatlantic journey to New York with 378 passengers on board. On December 3rd, 1931, she embarked on a 128-day round-the-world cruise, visiting the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Holy Land, before passing through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea. Her voyage continued to India, Ceylon, Southeast Asia, and the Dutch East Indies, then on to China, Hong Kong, and Japan. She crossed the Pacific to Hawaii and California, then transited the Panama Canal back to New York. The ship then made a one-way voyage from New York to Southampton, where she entered dry dock for maintenance and the reinstallation of her outer propellers. This schedule, with minor adjustments, was repeated each year until 1939, except for 1933. Canadian Pacific aimed to encourage travelers from the Canadian and US Midwest to take the train to Quebec City rather than New York, offering an extra day and a half of smooth sailing on the shorter, sheltered St. Lawrence River transatlantic route. The company marketed this route as having 39% less ocean. While this approach was initially successful, the novelty eventually faded, and the Empress of Britain became one of the least profitable liners of the 1930s. Captain W.G. Buskwood was the captain of the Empress of Britain during her visit to Sydney from April 2nd to 4th, and to Melbourne on April 6th, 1938. She was the largest liner to ever visit Australia. In Melbourne, a crowd of 250,000 gathered to welcome the ship, and the event was covered by the Argus newspaper. In June 1939, the Empress of Britain sailed from Halifax to Conception Bay, St. John's, Newfoundland, before heading eastbound to Southampton with her smallest passenger list. On board were just 40 passengers: King George VI, Queen Elizabeth, 13 ladies and lords in waiting, 22 household staff, a photographer, and 2 reporters. The royal couple and their entourage were comfortably settled in a series of suites. After this voyage, the Empress of Britain returned to her regular transatlantic service, but with the looming threat of war that would cast a shadow over the summer of 1939. On September 2nd, 1939, one day before the United Kingdom declared war and 7 days before Canada joined the war, the Empress of Britain set out on her final voyage for Canadian Pacific, carrying the largest passenger list in her history. Overcrowded with temporary berths in the Squash Court and other areas, the ship made a zigzag crossing of the Atlantic, reaching Quebec on September 8, 1939. Upon arrival, the ship was repainted gray and laid up, awaiting further orders. On November 25, 1939, the Empress of Britain was requisitioned as a troop transport. She made 4 transatlantic voyages, carrying troops from Canada to England before being sent to Wellington, New Zealand. In June 1940, she returned to Scotland as part of the $1 Million Convoy, a group of 7 ocean liners: the Andes, the Aquitania, Empress of Britain, the Empress of Canada, the Empress of Japan, the Mauretania, and the Queen Mary. In August 1940, the Empress of Britain transported troops to Suez via Cape Town, returning with 224 military personnel and civilians, along with a crew of 419. At approximately 9:20 a.m. on October 26, 1940, while traveling about 70 miles northwest of Ireland along the west coast, the Empress of Britain was spotted by a German Focke-Wulf FW 200 Sea Condor long-range bomber piloted by Oberleutnant Bernhard Jope. Jope's bomber strafed the ship 3 times and dropped 2 250-kilogram bombs, hitting her directly. Now, looking at the sinking in more detail, the ship was under the command of Captain Sapsworth when the attack occurred. Captain Sapsworth ordered his radio officer to send out a distress signal and then turn the ship side on into the wind to clear as much smoke as possible from the upper decks. These decks were already crowded with passengers and crew, driven topside by the spreading flames below. Firefighting teams were still battling the fires, but low water pressure in the mains meant that sand hastily scooped from large containers positioned on the upper decks for just such an emergency was the only resource many damage control parties had. Despite their heroic efforts, the fires continued to rage uncontrollably, with some flames fueled by the ship's cargo of sugar. At 9:50 a.m., just 30 minutes after the attack began, Captain Sapsworth ordered all stop on the engines and gave the command to abandon ship. Leaving the crippled Empress of Britain, however, proved to be a difficult task. Much of the ship's center section was impassable due to fire or structural damage. Most of those trying to escape the vessel gathered at the bow or stern, where they found some refuge from the flames. But this also placed them farther from the lifeboats. Crew members attempting to fight their way topside from the engine spaces faced particularly harrowing conditions, as wreckage blocked several emergency exits and thick, acrid smoke reduced visibility to just a few inches. Conditions were little better on deck. The air attack had destroyed several lifeboats and damaged others, and crew members attempting to lower the boats discovered that several davits were inoperable. Additionally, there was the urgent need to evacuate scores of wounded passengers, many suffering from severe burns. while officers and senior crew members did their best to ensure an orderly evacuation. It was often the individual courage of passengers and junior crew members that overcame the obstacles and managed to get people off the doomed ship. Getting into a lifeboat didn't always guarantee safety. Despite Captain Sapsworth's order to stop the engines, the enormous ship took time to fully halt. As a result, boats lowered while the Empress of Britain still had way risked being swamped or overturned if the ropes weren't released quickly enough. Once they reached the water, even those boats that made it into the water intact and were safely untethered were soon left behind as the ship's momentum carried her onward. The lifeboats posed additional dangers. About 22 crew members boarded one of the Empress of Britain's motor launches, unaware that the small vessel had been heavily damaged by German machine gun fire. As if that wasn't bad enough, the launch's engine, also hit by gunfire, caught fire shortly after leaving the ship's side. Nearby boats rushed to assist, but before they could reach the burning launch, it capsized. Only 8 of its occupants were rescued. As the evacuation continued, it became clear that the Empress of Britain was not going to sink easily. Despite occasional secondary explosions deep within her hull and flames spreading along her superstructure, the now motionless vessel remained afloat, listing slightly. Her stability allowed hastily organized search parties to comb the interior for survivors, and over the next 6 hours, dozens of passengers were found and transferred to lifeboats that returned alongside, despite the ongoing danger. It was a long morning and early afternoon for those already in the lifeboats, as the nearest Allied vessels were more than 100 miles away at the time of the attack. The first rescuers to arrive on the scene were the Polish Witcher-class destroyer ORP Burza and the British E-class destroyer HMS Echo, which had been detached from the convoy they were escorting to Scotland. They were soon joined by the Royal Navy's anti-submarine trawlers Drangi, Cape Arcona, and Painter. The destroyers immediately began rescuing people from the lifeboats, while the smaller, more maneuverable trawlers focused on pulling survivors from the sea and floating debris. By 6 p.m., all of the survivors, some 598 of the 643 passengers and crew members aboard at the time of the attack, had been transferred to Burza and Echo, which then set course for the Clyde after being relieved by the British destroyers HMS Broke and HMS Sardonyx. Before departing for Scotland, the captains of Burza and Echo, Lieutenant Commander Pitulko and Commander H.K. Spurgeon, both reported that the Empress of Britain was still afloat and might be salvageable despite her severe damage. As a result, the Royal Navy sent the rescue tug HMS Marauder and the Dutch salvage tug Thames, which arrived the day after the attack. Meanwhile, crew members from HMS Broke had boarded the still-burning liner to rig tow bridles. Once the tugs arrived, they began towing the Empress of Britain with a tandem bow tow. The arrival of the British rescue tug HMS Seaman and the civilian tug Raider further supported the salvage operation, and the tugs began making their way to Belfast, Northern Ireland, at a steady 4 knots, with Broke and Sardonyx escorting them and RAF Sunderland flying boats providing air cover during the day. The skeleton crew aboard Empress of Britain could feel relatively secure from further enemy attacks. The sense of security proved to be a false one, as trailing the salvage flotilla from a distance, was the German type Vela submarine U-32. Commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Hans Jenisch, the U-boat had left Lorient on 23 October for a routine patrol. While operating alongside U-28 and U-31, Jenisch's U-32 was positioned closest to the location of the Empress of Britain based on Bernhard Job's strike report. Consequently, Jenisch was ordered to close in on the damaged liner. He first sighted her on the morning of 27 October. However, aggressive patrolling by the escorting destroyers and anti-submarine trawlers kept U-32 at bay. Jenisch was forced to maintain his distance, relying on the submarine's hydrophones to track the British vessels through the night, awaiting an opportunity to strike. Jenisch's opportunity came in the early hours of 28 October. By carefully tracking the zigzag patterns of the British escort vessels, he maneuvered U-32 into a position between them and the Empress of Britain. At 1:45 a.m., he fired 2 torpedoes from his forward tubes. While one detonated prematurely several hundred yards short of its target, the other found its mark, exploding against the liner's side. Realizing he had landed a solid hit, Jenisch quickly dove the U-boat and altered course. However, when no assault came, he cautiously surfaced and took a brief look through the periscope at the Empress of Britain. What Jenisch saw astonished him. The British vessels had come to a near standstill, clustering around the Empress of Britain, seemingly under the impression that the explosion had been caused by fire reaching the ship's fuel tanks. Doubtful of his good fortune, Jenisch quickly fired a 3rd torpedo from his forward tubes. It struck amidships, just aft of the first explosion, sending another blast through the liner. Realizing that the escorts would soon figure out the true cause of the explosions and retaliate fiercely, Jenisch ordered the U-32 to dive deep and make a swift exit from the area. With water flooding in through the 2 massive holes in her side, it was evident that the Empress of Britain wouldn't survive much longer. Crewmen on the tugs scrambled to cut the tow lines to prevent their small vessels from being dragged under. Just 9 minutes after being struck by U-32's 3rd torpedo, the once majestic liner capsized and sank by the bow. She went down in 525 feet of water, eventually coming to rest upside down at Bloody Foreland, County Donegal, Ireland. There was suspicion that the Empress of Britain had been carrying gold. At the time, the British Empire was shipping gold to North America to bolster its credit and pay off its debts. South Africa, a major gold producer, had seen the Empress of Britain recently dock in Cape Town. Most of the gold consignments were transported from Cape Town to Sydney, Australia, and then on to America. However, due to a shortage of suitable ships, the gold often faced delays in Sydney. It's possible that, as a result of this backlog, the Empress of Britain was instead transporting gold from Cape Town to England, where it could then be moved across the Atlantic. In 1995, salvagers located the Empress of Britain using saturation diving. They found that the fire had destroyed much of the ship's decks, leaving only a hollow shell rising from the sea floor. However, the bullion room remained intact. Inside, they found a skeleton but no gold. It's believed that the gold was removed during the evacuation when the ship was ablaze. The body in the bullion room may have belonged to someone involved in the salvage operation.
And that marks the end of a video, my friends. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now, if you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing to the channel, as that would help out the channel a lot. Now, if you have any thoughts, comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, as I absolutely love reading your comments. And please let me know in the comment section down below as well what ships you would like me to cover in the future. Now be as well sure to check out our social media pages. We are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and we also recently have a website, oldshippinglines.com, where we have articles of the ships we cover and we have book reviews as well. I think you will enjoy the website very much. Now, with that out of the way, guys, I wish you all a good night or day, wherever you are. Stay safe, stay happy, and we will see each other on the next video. Goodbye, my friends.